What's going on, everyone? Today I've got the Traxxas TRX4 Sport here. Now this is one of the demo models that I was able to grab from one of my local hobby shops, RC Country. I just did one of my little local hobby shop tour videos on RC Country. So if you're ever in the Sacramento area, absolutely stop by. I'll link the video above. It's got all of their information in it. But they let me borrow the Traxxas TRX4 Sport so that I could kind of go over it a little bit today. And then as soon as it's done out of the demo phase, I'm going to pick this thing up and start a little project on it. Out of the box, the TRX4s have really been one of the most stout, ready-to-run options you can buy. However, there was a lot of things on them that they just really didn't do it for me as far as what I liked to use. Now, a lot of people love all the little extra features that the other TRX4s had, like the locking and unlocking front rear diffs and the 2-speed. For me though, it just wasn't something I'm interested in. I just didn't love it, and I didn't really find myself using them. I prefer a single-speed transmission with a solid brushless system if I'm crawling. I can get all of the low speed and high speed I need out of one system without having to use a 2-speed. That is my preference, and that is why that I think that this TRX4 Sport version is more in line with something that I would be interested in from Traxxas. First, looking at the TRX4 Sport, you will notice a handful of differences, most notably the body. It's got a non-licensed generic style truck body on it. The thing that I do like about the truck body is that it's much lighter than like the Defender body that I owned before. There isn't any extra accessories on it. It's just a bare bones Lexan body that doesn't add a lot of weight. The styling is something that you're either gonna be into or not. Personally, I don't love it. Traxxas, they always have the blacked out windows. It's just never something I can really get on board with loving the style. And the generic truck body styling in general, it's not offensive, but it's not my favorite. However, like we all know, bodies are easy to change and you can turn this truck into whatever you want. And what's really important is what's underneath. The bumper on this thing is tucked nicely up to the body. If you do change the body, you're definitely gonna have to look at how the bumper fits on whatever you may want to add, but it fits nicely to the Sport body. We have the same faux winch that we've seen since the beginning of the introduction of the Defender. The tires are the same Canyon tires that we've seen since Traxxas, since the introduction of this platform, but the wheels on this truck are new. And moving to the rear, we have a nice simple rear bumper with a couple of D-rings on there as well. Now also, with the removal of a lot of those features, Traxxas didn't need to provide that higher end, more optioned out radio. So instead, you get the most basic Traxxas radio, throttle and steering, basically all you get. So swapping this radio out is going to be a breeze with any aftermarket radio that you may be using. But if you just want steering and throttle, this will still get the job done. The sliders on this truck are basically the same system that we saw before, with the channel to help retain the body. Keeps everything nice and rigid though. They're a pretty solid design. But as we all know, the body is just something that covers up the important stuff that's underneath. We've got the TRX4 platform that's stripped down to really just what matters. We basically had the exact same chassis as the TRX4 Defender, but set up in the 12.3-inch wheelbase rather than the 12.8. We've got the same 21-turn 550 can Titan motor, the XL5 ESC. We no longer see the micro servos spread across the chassis. If you look closely, you'll notice things like where the shift fork went in on the transmission for the 2-speed, we now have a rubber plug. And we don't have the bracket that came off of the transmission to mount that micro servo. Similarly, on the passenger side, we don't have the mount for the micro servos for the diff lockers or the little holders that guided the cables to the axle. We do still have the nice Traxxas aluminum body shocks. They feel smooth out of the box, just a little bit of stiction right when you break them free, but as soon as you do that, they cycle really nicely. The axles are basically unchanged, other than some red diff covers rather than gray or chrome, depending on the model you're looking at. And where the cables went into the backside of the axle housing for the diff locker movement, now you'll see a plug there with an exposed E-clip on the outside. Being that the two biggest differences between the TRX4 Sport and any of the other TRX4 models is the transmission and the axles, let's go ahead, jump in, tear into these parts of the kit and see exactly what those look like inside. First, we're going to remove the battery tray. The battery tray out of the way, we're going to remove the motor mount. We need to remove the ESC to be able to access one of the screws on the transmission. We cut the zip tie off that holds that wire to the transmission as well. 2 more screws on the top and 1 more on the bottom. Before we can free the transmission from the chassis, we do need to remove the set pins from the drive shafts. Set the chassis aside and we're going to continue the teardown of this transmission. First, we're going to check out the main transmission gear. 3 screws on the back and 2 on the front will allow us to separate the main portion of the transmission. So inside the transmission, we have 2 all-metal sintered gears. These don't have any drive dogs or slide dogs, anything like that. They're just gears with pins right onto the shafts. Very simple, very durable, very reliable. We do have a longer spacer on the secondary shaft just to make sure everything's in place, since there isn't all of those other parts to make that mechanism work. Inside this transmission, these gears were also very well greased. So with that transmission reassembled, I am going to remove that back cover just to check those T-case gears. I don't expect to see any changes, but we might as well look while we're at it. And there we have it, the exact same T-case with the exact same gears and properly lubricated. So we've got our transmission completely back assembled, ready to go back into the truck. Now, for simplicity, I'm going to open up just the rear axle of this car. It's a little bit easier to work on, and for the most part, the internals are the exact same, other than things like the straight upper rear shafts rather than the CVD style front axle shafts. But for the parts that I want to see, this axle should do just fine. First thing I'm going to do is pull off this rear portal box, show you guys exactly what's inside. I'll put a link to the power driver that I'm using as well in the description below. With the rear portal box removed, we can now remove the 6 screws from the rear and the 2 screws from the front. Looks like the exact same gears that we're used to seeing, even that top gear that has been one of the bigger problems in the Traxxas TRX4 as far as gears and keeping them alive. Next, I'm going to check out the ring and pinion, but we're going to need to pull both portal boxes off so we can remove those rear axle shafts so that we can pull that out. When you're pulling your rear axle apart, make sure that you note that the passenger side rear axle shaft is longer than the driver's side rear axle shaft by about 1/4 of an inch. I've removed the rear lower links from the chassis side so that I can flip those back and easily access all 4 of the screws to take off that rear diff cover. With all 4 of those screws removed, we can easily remove that cover. And then out falls the ring gear and the one-piece spool. Super simple, nothing to it. Now we do still have cast gears and a cast locker, so you know, there's always the possibility of having those parts go out on you. So of course there is machined options to upgrade both of those parts available. Otherwise, inside the housing is completely empty. There's no placeholders or anything else needed for that diff locking assembly that's been removed. It's just wide open in there. But with that, guys, that is my in-depth look at the Traxxas TRX4 Sport and what is included with it. I am actually excited to turn a Traxxas TRX4 into a project now. Before, they just weren't there for me. It just wasn't what I was looking for, but this one is right where I'm looking for the base of a little bit different style build. Stay tuned in the next couple of weeks for the beginning of this project. Thanks for watching. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you're not already, and we'll see you on the next one.